is the Congresswoman-elect from New York's 14th Congressional District. She is a bold progressive fighting for a Green New Deal and for other legislation, not only in terms of the environment, but in all areas. They're going to protect ordinary people against the greed of big money. So, Alexandria, we're delighted that you're joining us this evening. Let me start off with a pretty simple question. We have heard over and over again from the Trump administration and from fossil fuel economists that if we transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and we become more energy efficient and we move to wind and solar and other sustainable energy, what they are telling us is going to be a disaster for the economy. Is President Trump right? That's a hard one. I want you to think about it before you respond. Or is there, in fact, ideas out there that would enable us to create millions of good-paying jobs as we move away from fossil fuels?
It's unsurprising that the response to any bold proposal that we have is to incite fear. To incite fear of loss, to incite fear of others, to incite fear of our future. But the only way we are going to get out of this situation is by choosing to be courageous. That's the only way we're going to get out of this. And first of all, it's just plain wrong. The idea that we're going to somehow lose economic activity, as a matter of fact, it's not just possible that we will create jobs and economic activity by transitioning to renewable energy, but it's inevitable that we are going to create jobs. It's inevitable that we're going to create industry. And it's inevitable that we can use the transition to 100% renewable energy as the vehicle to truly deliver and establish economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. That is our proposal, and that is what we are here to do, because in the depths of darkness, in the depths of despair, which what we last saw, when we think about where we were when the New Deal was established. We were a nation in depression, in Great Depression. We were a nation on the brink of war. We saw the rise of fascism creeping across in Europe. And no one would thought that a nation so poor, so scarce, and so in such dire straits as we were in that time could pursue such a bold economic agenda. But we chose to do it anyway. We had the courage to do it anyway. And that is what this moment demands of us right now. That's what we have to do. This is going to be the great society, the moonshot, the civil rights movement of our generation. That is the scale. That is the scale of the ambition that this movement is going to require.
How do we, I think what we all understand is that we're fighting for the future of the planet. But what Alexandria is talking about is that not only can we effectively combat climate change, but in the process, we can do good economics and create millions of good-paying jobs here and throughout the world. Alexandria, go into some detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to also talk about the fact that this is not just an economic solution, is that this is the mechanism through which we can really deliver justice to communities that have been underserved. The water in Flint is still dirty. The water in Flint is still dirty. We've got children, Van and I were talking earlier, we've got children that are choking on the smoke in California. Those same children, and rather children mirrored of those children in Puerto Rico are choking on the fungal spores because we have not recuperated from the crisis, and the mold from the floods is taking up all of these people's homes. We have injustices in this country. Those injustices are concentrated in frontline communities, in indigenous, Black, and brown communities. They are the ones that experience the greatest depths of this injustice. But if we chose, and if we had the moral, political, and economic courage to say, we're going to fix all the pipes in Flint, we would put a lot of people to work at that at the same time. And that is what this is about.
Van should ask the first question here, because Van literally wrote the book 10 years ago on the kind of green collar economy and green jobs and things.
Ben?
Well, first of all, it just brings tears to your eyes to hear you. It's just unbelievable. And, you know, Bill and Bernie, myself, and a bunch of other people here, we tried to take this hill in 2008. A big part of Obama's agenda was essentially the Green New Deal. I had a job in the White House to try to implement it. Right wing came after me. I had to resign under fire. Then they came after Bill, and we couldn't get it done. But I think you're going to get it done. And
We're going to get it done. We're going to get it done.
So rather than talk about my book, The Green Collar Economy, I have a two-part question. One is about you, and the other is about your generation. Where did you come from? Why did you run for office? You told me that you went to a protest, and as a result, something happened. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, I first started considering running from Congress. I know a lot of people want to run from Congress. I first started thinking about running for Congress actually at Standing Rock in North Dakota and South Dakota. And it was really from that crucible of activism where I saw people putting their lives on the line and Native peoples putting everything they had on the line, not just for themselves, not just so that this country can honor the treaties that we have made, but for the entire water supply for the Midwest United States, that they're putting everything on the line for others, for people that they have never met and never known, but they did know that children were out there drinking that water, going to drink that water. And when I saw that, I knew that I had to do something more. And, you know, it wasn't even planned to be this way, but I guess it's kind of a poetry of history of sorts, that's where I started. And then the very first week, Sunrise, young people at Sunrise came up and asked me to join them in protest and to take that protest to the halls of Congress. And it's what needs to be done in this moment.
Well, you know, the fact that you start as a protester and then you run for office against all odds, you win, and then join the rest of young people, you're still protesting even while you're in power. I think that idea of being both a movement leader and a politician, which I think Bernie Sanders is probably the best example of, is something I think is important. The other thing I think about your politics that's interesting is your generation uses the term intersectionality, which I've had to look up, but it's, I think, we used to call it the Rainbow Coalition back in the 80s and 90s, but you guys have taken it to a different level. Can you just talk about, we had a slogan 10 years ago, green jobs, not jails. That we saw criminal justice and economic justice and environmental justice as one fight. That those kids standing on street corners, we don't have disposable resources, we don't have disposable species, we don't have disposable children or neighborhoods either. It's all precious. And that those kids could be putting up those solar panels, like Bernie was saying, and making a positive difference. Can you just speak to the intersectional power of your Green New Deal?
Yeah, it's really the core of that is leave no person behind. We cannot have a solution, we cannot move forward into our future unless every single American is considered part of that. And whenever we see oversights, oftentimes when we get to the negotiating table in laws, in policy making, there's this idea that, oh, we can leave the poorest of the poor behind, or we don't have to worry about this tiny sliver of the population because they're just a tiny sliver of the population. And what that eventually does is that it creates a crack. And that crack, really, if you think of there being like a crack in the dam, it's usually where things always break down. And when we create policy the right way with integrity that honors everybody from the most vulnerable to the most powerful, when we acknowledge and see every person in this country, which is really what it's about, is that we have chosen not to see people in this country. We have chosen not to see people in this country until the majority of us have become unseen economically. Working people are not seen in the halls of Congress. Working people are not seen in policy making until we realize that the majority of Americans are working or working poor. And we are not seen. And it's time for us to be seen.
Shailene and Bill comment. You use the word, which I absolutely agree with, is that millions of people out there are suffering, they're in pain, turn on the TV, they're not seen. Your observations on how media covers the pain that working people feel?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's through that negligence in how we cover working people. We think of, you look at this idea, I mean, I think it's funny, and I think it's been this kind of interesting puzzle in how media, and especially, you know, right-wing media, but all media sometimes even treats me, because in our journey, I am a working person that won a seat against all odds. We were outspent $4 million, and I had $300,000 in the bank, all in small dollar contributions, and we won anyway. And people didn't know what to say. People didn't know how to react. They say, "Oh, she was just a bartender." Never mind the fact that I had experience in policy making, that I was an educational organizer. It's the idea that the amount of money you make for a living actually equals your worth in society.
But can we interrupt this program to make an announcement about your shoes?
Yes, yes.
I think we need at least a half-hour discussion about your shoes. Just kidding.
And the same day as this, but it's a funny note, but the exact same day as the Trump administration's climate report, which they tried to bury, which they tried to air a month early, the day after Thanksgiving, that same day they spent in prime time talking about my shoes. And that is what I talk about when I say being unseen, is that they won't even bring it up. They don't bring up the percentage of Americans that make less than $40,000 or $50,000 a year. They don't bring up the fact that we have amassed some of the largest amounts of wealth in American history, but we have never seen so many people struggling and living paycheck to paycheck in the way that we are today.
Okay, Bill, Shailene?
Just to bring it back to jobs and opportunity, people who are currently working in coal mines, or people who are currently working in jobs that we talk about replacing or offering new opportunity. I have a family member who's a coal miner, and he isn't against the reality of climate change. He isn't against renewables, but it's more, how am I supposed to feed myself as this transition happens? How do you speak on that?
Great question.
Because there's so much fear in that.
Question.
Yes.
It's real.
And for folks who are interested in learning more about this whole movement, I suggest when we talk about transition, we talk about just transitions. Transitions to renewable energy that also provide justice to all communities that are impacted, whether they are people that need to leave their homes on the shores of Puerto Rico, whether they are coal miners that feel like they may be transitioned out of a job. We need to have a just transition. That includes fully funding the pensions that all of these coal miners are due, of which they are being stripped. That means that we need to truly provide for those that are younger in their careers, truly provide educational opportunities in order for them to transition to renewable energy jobs as well. And, right there, there's an amazing environmental activist out in West Virginia. Her name's Paula Jean Swearingen. She actually ran for Senate this year. And she says, if another country came in and bombed our mountains and poisoned our water, we would go to war. And we cannot allow that level of disrespect of our people and of our land to continue. And again, when it comes to the economics of it, we can put so many people to work. We need to refit so many pipes. We need to relay roads. We need to rebuild schools. We need to invent technology that's never even been invented yet. There is no shortage of work to do, but we need to decide to do it. We need to say, we're going to do it.
Bill?
Well, first of all, just thank you so much. You've done the thing that politicians at their very best do, which is seize a moment when it appears. And the sight of you joining the Sunrise Movement young people in the Speaker's office to say time for change was a galvanizing moment. It took this fall, when we've had these one disaster after another and one huge report after another, and made them politically real in a sense, and so such gratitude. As we go forward with this Green New Deal, as I understand it, so I want to sort of just ask you sort of a little bit about the mechanics of things going forward. As I understand it, the plan is to have a committee and then take till 2020 to sort of figure out with a lot of input where we're going. So over the last 10 or 12 years, climate movements learned a lot of lessons about climate justice. In the Midwest, people have learned about how important stopping eminent domain for private gain would be. Across North America, we've learned how important tribal sovereignty is to these fights. Over and over and over, we've learned that a key lesson is not just to say we're going to do green jobs. It's going to say we have to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure, because if we keep digging the hole deeper at the same time that we're digging out of it, we never get out of it. So what's the sort of mechanism in your mind over the next couple of years for people to take those lessons and those concerns and help make them into this policy that maybe after the 2020 elections we'll be able to really do something with?
Absolutely. Well, the good news is that we're not starting from scratch. There's so many people like Van, like Senator Merkley, who had established the select committee when he was in the House, a previous select committee. There's a lot of legislation that has been drafted to already start addressing some of these smaller issues, just transitions in coal, whether it's our energy infrastructure, whether it's battery, when we're looking at battery grids and so on. There's a lot of work that has already been done, but it needs to be consolidated and brought under the tent of a Green New Deal. And when we try to solve this issue piecemeal, we are not going to get it solved in time. That's why we are asking for this really great, ambitious, singular plan. And that is why, I believe that the progressive movement is the only movement that has answers right now. We're the only ones that are drawing from the lessons of history, from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, from some of the most ambitious projects that we have pursued in American history. And that truly, again, is the scale that it's going to take. So, I think that there's so much work that has been done, and there's some outlying questions, especially when it comes to investment in technologies. When we as a public choose to invest in when we as a public choose to invest in new technologies, we deserve a return on that investment. And for far too long, we gave money to Tesla, we gave money to a ton of people, and we got no return on our investment that the public made in creating technologies. And it's about time that we get our due, because it's the public that funded and financed a lot of innovative technologies, and that's another, thing
Let me
to go.
just jump in, and thanks so much for being with us. In the next few weeks and months, very important decisions are going to be made in the House and in the Senate. The truth of the matter is that the American people, in my view, understand the moral imperative of combating climate change for our kids and grandchildren, and they increasingly understand that we can create millions of jobs as we do that. So I would hope that everybody who has heard Alexandria tonight, she can't do it alone, the other good people in the House can't do it alone. We need millions of people to stand up and tell the Congress, hey, stop worrying about the fossil fuel industry. Stop